It's been a couple of weeks, hasn't it? Last week, I had a message all prepared, and God had a different plan. And I'm so glad He did. And I want you to know that God is in control here. So I've had 2 weeks to work on this passage, this message this morning. You would expect it to be a good one, wouldn't you? I mean, I've had twice as long to get ready for it. And I got ready twice. We kind of tweaked it. We're in Mark chapter 7, 8, and 9. So all I've got to do today is cover 3 chapters in one message, no problem. And I actually had a good plan for making that happen. And I want to tell you, God's just toying with me right now. Because last night He said, I want you to take the outline that you had, the plan that you had, and I just want you to put it aside. Well, here we go again. I'm like, God, if I keep doing this, they're going to think that I don't have any value if I don't preach once in a while, at least. God said, don't worry. I've got a message. I just want you to ride along with me. So you and I are going to go on a journey together. How's that sound? So we've been going through the book of Mark, which is an edgy kind of book, as Mark, and is one of the first gospel, is the first gospel written. And Mark is kind of, and the reason we chose Mark through this encounter series is Mark highlights the encounters that Jesus has with people. And sometimes they're positive encounters, and sometimes they're fairly negative, antagonistic encounters. And a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we talked about how we serve a dangerous God. And 2 weeks ago, Chris Hain, while I was gone in Germany, taught about how we have expectations of God. And sometimes when we come to God with our expectations, they're not God's expectations. Well, this morning, the encounter that we're going to talk about, that we're going to look at, shows what happens when our expectations get taken too far. We have a dangerous God, do we not? Yes. But there are also dangerous Christians, aren't there? And so we're going to talk about when our expectations go too far, Christians can become pretty dangerous. And I want to tell you that this is near and dear to my heart. This is one of those topics that wakes me up in the morning. I want the church of today to be relevant and impact the world. But I think too far, and I'm not the first to say this, it's kind of a cliche, the church is becoming known for what we stand against versus what we stand for. And the reason for that is found in our passage this morning. So Jesus in our passage this morning, so you can turn to Mark chapter 7, but I will tell you the encounter that Jesus has started all the way back in Mark chapter 2. When the Pharisees, now as soon as I say the word Pharisee, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Legalism. Good, what else? Is it a positive or a negative kind of feel? Negative. Every time we talk about the Pharisees, it's like those guys, right? How could they do that? Well, in Mark chapter 2 and 3, and I even think into 4, they have several encounters with Jesus. And I mentioned these when we were back in those chapters, but I'm going to bring them back because today's encounter kind of harkens back to those encounters. In Mark 2, 3, and 4, the Pharisees are watching Jesus and His disciples. And they notice that, first of all, they don't fast like everybody else does. And so they ask Jesus, why don't your disciples fast? And He says, well, it's not time. They will, but I'm here, so there's no reason to fast. And then they notice, hey, your disciples don't follow the Sabbath like they're supposed to. And Jesus said, no. You guys got it backwards. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And then Jesus does something even further. He heals on the Sabbath. How scandalous. Because that's called work. And we're not allowed to do any work on the Sabbath. And Jesus challenges their status quo. Well, today I want to show you, the encounter today is radical. It is crazy. Are you ready to see what they argued about today? Are you ready? So I've been coughing a little bit this morning, and if you've shaken my hand, you're probably wondering, am I going to get sick? And the answer is probably. Because, I don't wash my hands that's not true. I'm just kidding. But I do want to wash my hands here. So Suzanne, if you would come up, I'm going to do a thorough cleansing, okay? Are you ready? And what you're about to witness is exactly the encounter that Jesus had with the Pharisees. All right, let's wash these hands. Okay, that's enough. Now I need the towel. Okay, do you feel like my hands are clean? This is the encounter. What you just saw, I got to clean up all this water. Thank you, Suzanne. This encounter that you just saw is the encounter, this scene that you just saw is the encounter that Jesus has with the Pharisees. Open up, to Mark chapter 7. I'm on a lot of drugs right now, so it's a good chance I'm going to fall off this stage. One day, some Pharisees and teachers of religious law arrived from Jerusalem to see Jesus. They noticed that some of his disciples failed to follow the Jewish ritual of hand washing before eating. The Jews, especially the Pharisees, do not eat until they have poured water over their cupped hands as required by the ancient traditions. Similarly, they do not eat anything from the market until they immerse their hands in water. This is one of the many traditions they have clung to, such as their ceremonial washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of religious law asked him, "Why don't your disciples follow our age-old tradition? They eat without performing the hand-washing ceremony." Now, let's go on a little journey here. What words did you hear as I read through the beginning of Mark chapter 7? Traditions. It says that over and over and over again, right? Traditions and rituals. It says they noticed that the disciples weren't following the ritual of hand washing. Now, I don't know about you, but when my mom taught me to wash my hands, it was a little more extensive than what you just saw here this morning. What was missing out of this whole ceremony this morning? Soap. What else? Time, scrubbing. I mean, would you say that my hands are clean? No. Yeah. Hey, glad you're not my surgeon. My hands just got wet. This whole thing, what you just saw, they looked at the Pharisees looked at the disciples and said, they're not washing their hands. And we look at that and go, you're not washing your hands. Nobody is washing their hands. This is called a ritual, a ceremony, a tradition. In fact, it's what they called it. Now, and I want you to hear this clearly, I am not saying that traditions and ceremony and rituals are bad, but they have to mean something. We have to understand what they mean, yes? Now, this ritual at some point had a purpose. Can you guess what its original intent was? To wash your hands before you ate. Cleanliness. Hygiene. I mean, this is an agricultural society, which means when they worked, they got dirty. At some point, someone said, and by the way, it wasn't God. This is not a Mosaic law. This is not God said. They even said it themselves. They don't follow the Jewish ritual. They don't follow our age-old tradition. They're not in fact, there was a name for these traditions. It was called the Mishnah. How many of you have heard of the Mishnah? 2 of you. What have you heard of? When you think of old Jewish laws, what have you heard of? I heard it. Say it louder. You're right, so say it louder. The 10 Commandments, the Torah, God's law, Moses' law, yes? This isn't even part of that. This is an age-old custom. This is what the old guys did back. Remember the good old days? This is before the good old days. Now, you and I know when this got started, it had a good purpose. The good purpose was wash your hands. But what did it turn into? Ritual. And only, this is important, and only ritual. Was the original intent still here? No. I don't know if you know this week, and I'm going to say this because it's very self-serving in case you forgot, but this last week was my birthday. And I forgive you for not telling me happy birthday. It's okay, I'm old. You probably told me and I forgot. That's how old I'm getting, right? Birthdays are a ritual, aren't they? What's the intent behind a birthday? To celebrate, to party. But what are we partying? The day we arrived. In my case, it's that the world was given the gift that is me. Right? I mean, well, Suzanne said, wow. I mean, in a way, that's what we're doing with birthdays, right? I mean, not just for me, but for all of us. But there's an original intent behind it. And it stays, that original intent stays with every birthday. The problem with this ritual is it had lost all of the original intent. And so the Pharisees are upset, not because, get this is important, not because their hands weren't clean, but because they hadn't followed the ritual. It wasn't about were your hands clean. Have you ever watched your kids wash their hands before? Yeah, I've had that. You ever had that thing where they wash their hands and you say, let me see the back? And you see the back, you're like, oh no, go try it again, right? This doesn't even get close to that. They're following a tradition for the sake of the tradition. And listen to how Jesus responds to them. You hypocrites. What does Jesus call them? Hypocrites. He says, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you, for he wrote, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship is a farce, for they teach man-made ideas as commands from God. Did you see that? Man-made ideas as commands from God. You ignore God's law and substitute your own tradition. And he's not done with them. He says, you skillfully sidestep God's law in order to hold on to your own tradition. So he's saying, look, you've got God's law, but you're saying the Mishnah, your tradition, supersedes God's law. Man's idea supersedes God's idea. And he says, let me give you an example. For instance, Moses gave you this law from God. Who gave the law? Moses did. From who? God. Honor your father and mother. Anyone ever heard of that one? Honor your father and mother. And anyone who speaks disrespectfully of father or mother must be put to death. Ooh, wouldn't you like to bring that part back? But you say it is all right for people to say to their parents, sorry, I can't help you, for I have vowed to give to God what I would have given to you. In this way, you let them disregard their needy parents, and so you cancel. Verse 13 is so important. You cancel the word of God in order to hand down your own tradition, and this is only one example among many others. So this is what had happened in Jewish culture in this time. We had the Mishnah, which was an age-old tradition. We had God's law. In the Mishnah was a thing called the Korban. We're learning all kinds of words today, aren't we? The Korban said, now, on its own, just listen to it on its own and tell me if this doesn't sound good. When you make a vow to God, the vow to God supersedes everything. Sound good? If you make a vow to God, you better follow through on it. You make a vow to God, it's important, yes? So here's what the Pharisees had done. They created a loophole for God's law. God said what? What was the example Jesus gave? Honor your father and your mother. But if you want a loophole out of it, all you got to do is call on the Korban, call on this loophole and say, I really don't want to give money to my mother and father. What I will do is commit it. I will vow it to God. And now, because I've committed what I would give to my parents to God, that supersedes what God said. Now that sounds good, doesn't it? But who came up with the Korban? Man did. Who came up with honor your father and mother? God did. So even if there's good intent behind it, Jesus says when you try and take your law, your idea, your tradition, and you superimpose it over God's law, his ideas, you're a hypocrite and you're a dangerous Christian. Now the good news for you and me is none of us have ever done this. Can you think of any example where we've taken our tradition and superseded God's law? Do as I say, not as I do. Yikes. I use that one on my kids all the time. Let's talk about this. What is God's law? No, we're not talking Old Testament times now. We're talking New Testament. We live in New Testament times, yes? What's God's law? Love God with everything you got and love others It says all the law and all the prophets are wrapped up in this, Jesus said. So Jesus did us a favor, didn't he? I mean, 10 was a lot to hold on to. I mean, 10 things is hard. Can any of you name the 10 commandments right now and get them all perfect in one shot? You know how I do it? Genesis 20. It's written down. I can go look it up, right? Because I always miss one. No matter how hard I try, no matter how many, I always miss one or two, and I'm like, I can't remember the one it is, and I know it's probably a big one, right? And I even know there's 4 that relate to God and 6 that relate to other people. And I try but I always forget one because I'm human. Jesus knew we were human, so he says, you know what? I'm going to take it from 10 down to 1. Just 1. I just want you to remember one thing. What's that one thing? Love God and love everybody else. Okay, maybe that's 2. 1, 2, and 1. But it's still pretty simple. Love God with everything you got. And the way I want you to do that is by loving one another. Did we ever let our traditions supersede that law? Do we? Anyone want to bring up a tough one? Oh, bombing of abortion clinics. What else? How about how we feel about gays? What's the law? See, you don't even want to say it. What's the law? Love. And Christian culture has hated them, has alienated them, hasn't it? And I'm putting myself in that bucket. I'm trying to figure out, how do I do this? Jesus says, your tradition, when it supersedes, verse 13, you cancel the word of God in order to hand down your own tradition. That is hard stuff, isn't it? It's hard stuff because here's the truth. We think the Pharisees are so bad, but when we stand and look in the mirror, what are we looking at? We're looking at a Pharisee, aren't we? Because it's in our heart. Because what Jesus says next, man, Jesus really blows the doors off next, because he's talking to the Pharisees now. Now he gets away and he's talking to the disciples and some other people, and he says, guys, I want to tell you that what goes into your body doesn't matter. That's not what defiles you. What defiles you is what comes out of your mouth. It's what's in your heart that defiles you. What Jesus was saying, and Mark does this little parenthesis here in verse 19. He says, by saying this, he declared that every kind of food is acceptable in God's eyes. Little parenthetical statement by Mark, but that was enormous. That was huge. What Mark was saying was, bacon is okay. Right? Could they eat pork in Jesus' day? Why not? God said no. Why did God say no? What was the original intent? Because now God is saying yes. Is God changing his mind? What changed? Hygiene changed. If you eat pork that has not been properly taken care of, what will happen to you? You will die a slow, horrible death. And the bacon will not have been worth it. But if you eat bacon that has been properly taken care of, and has been sliced just so, and put in a frying pan just so, and has been heated to the proper temperature, and is not crispy, but just, you know, that right before crispy level that bacon gets to? My wife says it needs to be just this side of burnt. She's wrong. She needs Jesus in her life, and we're talking about it. But when you get it just this side of that crispy thing, have you ever walked into a house when someone's cooking bacon? It's heaven right there to me, right? We can eat bacon, but God said you couldn't eat bacon. Jesus here says everything you eat is okay because it's not about the food. Jesus says we're taking these things. This hand washing became a physical thing. It's not a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing, right? And so the disciples, being all holy, just 2 chapters later, think they've got this all figured out. Well, we are so much better than the Pharisees. In fact, in chapter 9, starting in verse 33, they think that they are so much better that on the road from one place to another, they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. They're having this conversation. No, I'm better than you. Jesus picked me first. Jesus likes me better. And Jesus says, what are you guys talking about? And they say sheepishly that they didn't want to answer, verse 34, because they'd been arguing about who was the greatest. And so Jesus sat them down. He called the disciples over to him. He said, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. Then he put a little child among them, taking the child in his arms. He said, anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not only me, but also my Father who sent me. What does that have anything to do with the conversation with the Pharisees? Jesus is telling us here how to be dangerous Christians. Let me ask you a question. Do you want to be a dangerous Christian? Now, you've known me long enough to know that that's a trick question. Do you want to be a dangerous Christian? What's the answer? Yes and no. Do you want to be a Pharisee kind of dangerous Christian? What do Pharisee kind of dangerous Christians do? They judge other people. Jesus said they take their own traditions, man-made traditions, and they make them more important than God's laws. And then, here's what the real problem with the Pharisees was. They didn't just do it to themselves. They didn't just say, this is my rule, this is something God wants me to do. What did they say? This is what everyone has to do. If you want to walk with God, you want to be with God, then everyone must do it. And they taught it that way. And Jesus says, no. Now, are there times when there are things that I should do or not do that really don't apply to you? Yes. Can you think of one example? I'll give you a silly one. Thinking about going on a diet. Don't get too excited. I'm just thinking about it. I'm watching Alton Brown. Remember the Good Eats guy? And he has this diet plan, so I'm looking to see, could I do that maybe? And he has on his rules, his list of rules, he doesn't eat milk, he doesn't drink milk. Because when he drinks milk, it leads him to bad things like cookies and cake. So milk is a gateway drug for him to cookies and cake, so he doesn't drink milk. Now, what if Alton Brown said nobody should ever drink milk? Milk is evil. It's of the devil. It's a bad thing. Is that true? No, milk is great. When I drink milk, I don't drink cookies and cake. I do those anyway. It has nothing to do with milk, right? But see, we can take, and I grew up in this culture, which is probably why it's kind of, it hits at my core a little bit. I grew up in a culture that did this. I grew up in a church culture that took our traditions and placed them over everything. Over everything. I mean, everything became a sacred cow. Anyone ever grow up in a place like that? And the problem is we can swing a little too far the other way, right? But that's a different sermon. My question for you is, what kind of dangerous Christian do you want to be? Jesus laid it out here in this last section of chapter 9. Like, you can be a dangerous Christian like the Pharisees, that are always talking about what you can and cannot do. You're not fasting, you're doing work on the Sabbath. And by the way, growing up, I had an argument with my great-grandparents about work that you could or couldn't do on the Sabbath. And this godly Christian man and woman, giants in my eyes. But we had a conversation because I felt like they were taking their tradition and and we had the old conversation. You're not even talking about the Sabbath the right way. What day is Sabbath? Saturday. You're working on Saturday. Sinner! No, I didn't say that. I know I'd have gone straight to hell if I said that to my great-grandfather. I mean, just instantly I'd have been an ink spot. It'd be done. But we had that conversation. And to this day, it was a tradition that had held over. Now, it had good intent, right? Did this have good intent? Yes, but somewhere along the way it got lost. Here's the problem, and this is a tension we hold. Does culture change? Yes. I would love to do 80s worship bands, worship songs every Sunday. I would love it. But you know who doesn't love it? Everyone out there. And who are we trying to get in here? Everyone out there. Is this about me? No. I'm going to step on some toes right now, okay? And we get this all the time. Pastor, in the same Sunday, Pastor, the music is too loud. Pastor, the music is too soft. in the same Sunday. What do I do with that? I don't know. So in another church I was at, I used to run the soundboard. I'll let you know a little secret. Kurt's going to hurt me for doing this. So people would say that to me all the time. And so I had a little slider that did nothing. Someone would say the music's too loud. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll turn it down. Oh, thank you, that's perfect. The music's too soft. Oh, I'll crank it up for you. Oh, that's perfect. Didn't do anything. But we perceive it, right? That's a little rabbit trail. I'm coming back. What kind of Christian do you want to be? Do you want to be a Pharisee Christian who puts your tradition over God's law? What's God's law, by the way? Love God and love others. Or do you want to be the kind of Christian that Jesus is talking about? Whoever wants to be first must be last and be the servant of everyone else. If you are that kind of a Christian, if you are the kind of Christian who loves other people and puts them in first place and puts yourself in last place, who serves other people even though it might cost you everything, it might put you in a bad place, it might make you uncomfortable. If you are that kind of Christian, guess what kind of Christian you are? Oh, you are a dangerous Christian. And the enemy wants absolutely nothing to do with you. And he'll do everything in his power to tear you down. So let me ask you, what kind of dangerous Christian do you want to be? Do you want to be one that's like the Pharisees? And by the way, I'm talking to myself. I have these same tendencies. I want things to be. See, Burger King messed it all up for us, didn't they? You remember in the 70s, early 70s? There was this argument between McDonald's and Burger King. Burger King finally said, you can have it your way. Did you know that at that time at McDonald's, if you didn't want pickles, you know what they'd tell you? Take them off. Pick them off. See, my argument is I can still taste it. There's still pickle residue there. I can taste it. I don't want that pickle residue. Burger King came along and said, you can have it your way. You know what we teach in churches too often? You can have it your way. But Jesus says if you want to be a dangerous Christian, the Pharisees said, I want it my way. Jesus said, how about let it be everybody else's way? But Pastor, that's no fun. Yeah, it is. You watch what happens when you let God let you be a dangerous Christian. What kind of Christian, dangerous Christian, do you want to be? The good kind or the bad kind? You know what the best part is? The decision is yours. Let's stand and pray. Father, this is a hard message for me to teach. Because as with most of them, I don't live up to what the ideal here. I fall short of this far too often. I worry about what other people think about me. I worry about the things I like, the preferences that I have. And quite honestly, for me, it's probably even more dangerous because I can make things happen the way I like them. I'm the pastor. Father, that puts me in a dangerous place. I don't want to be a Pharisee. I don't want to have that kind of heart and attitude where I'm doing things out of tradition simply because they're tradition. I want to do tradition. I want to have ritual. Father, I think about communion. That is a ritual. That's a ceremony. But it has meaning. And we want to hold on to that meaning. But even in the Corinthian church, they took that ceremony, that ritual, and turned it into something that it wasn't supposed to be. That is so much a part of who we are in our sinful nature. And Father, I'm just asking that you'll help us not be that way, not to be the bad, dangerous Christian, but to follow your law. It's hard for us to figure out in this culture that we live in, when it seems like right is wrong and wrong is right and everything seems upside down. It's hard to know. Are we really supposed to love everybody? The answer is yes. Father, that's hard because they're different from us and they don't like us and they're weird and we're weird and we just don't seem to mesh together. Father, help us figure that out. Help us to be dangerous Christians who serve and love as you served and loved us. Father, communion reminds us and we sang it this morning, we didn't earn it, we don't deserve it, but you sought after us. The people out in the world, they didn't earn it, they don't deserve it, but you ask us to seek after them with the love of Jesus Christ. Help us to be good, dangerous Christians for your kingdom. And all God's people said, amen. God bless you. Go be a dangerous Christian.